So I would like you all to look at the next one, which is, what would you like to receive for investing yourself here? So hold that intention. You can respond if you like, but I won't seek that right now. Just know what you would like to receive in it. What I've heard is that it's sort of contained in what brought you here, right? More understanding, more clarity, more awareness, and being part of the solution. So let's start with this. What is your understanding of racism? This is for everybody. Just pause for a moment. What is my understanding of racism?
This is Kathy.
Kathy.
My understanding of racism is assuming certain characteristics of a person based on their race.
Thank you. Who else?
And it doesn't have to just include race. It can be anyone who's different from us.
Okay.
From me.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. So it's not just about race. And in this book, Dr. Kendi says that same thing, that he's not just talking about the color of one's skin. He's talking about that when he talks about being anti-racist, but he has expanded the scope to color of skin, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender issues, religion, yeah, all of those things.
This is Judy.
My understanding of racism is mostly divisiveness.
Mm.
It separates people in all different areas.
Excellent, excellent. It's so we're saying racism is divisiveness. It separates us one from the other, which is the opposite of the song we listen to. He's my brother or sister.
And judgment.
And judgment.
It's a judgment.
It's also very demeaning.
Demeaning.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the earlier years of my life, you know, a child, a teenager, I think I just saw it as hate, you know, a vicious kind of hate. I think as the years went on, I began to see it more as somebody who's so terribly wounded themselves that they don't deal with or look at, and it gets projected out into the world. And so I brought some kindness to it that wasn't there early on, but when the street fighter in me comes out, when I'm defending or advocating for somebody, I don't have much of that, you know, at the moment that I'm fighting it.
Yeah. So are you saying then racism, there's something about that whole package of racism that is hateful and vicious to wounded,
Yes.
projection of woundedness.
Yes. Well, and it also includes fear.
And fear.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And
Anybody
superiority.
else? Superiority?
Yes, it's to make one more superior than the next.
Thank you.
In order to do that, you have to put one down.
Yeah.
This is Georgia. I think that racism is all-encompassing of the policies and the ideas about racists that promotes racial inequality. To me, racism is a bias. It's a system. It's not individual. It's not one race. It's at any point in time, you're pulling together policies and ideas.
Thank you. And that's something that Dr. Kendi addresses in this book. Where he stands is, I mean, and I haven't actually finished the whole book because it requires full presence to the ideas that he's sharing, and so it's not quick reading, but he does make a case for until the policies are changed, we haven't really accomplished equality for all and
Yeah,
understand.
because our Constitution says that there's equality for all, but the policies remain very vague, kind of abstract, generalized. You know, they don't really work their way down to specifics. In certain organizations they might, but not overall.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you. Who else on sharing your understanding of racism?
I would like to say something.
Is that
My
Linda?
Yes, my understanding is that racism is an attitude and a belief that somebody has more power and control over others and likes to oppress people for their own benefit, like
Great.
slavery.
Thank you. Great. Taking some notes here. Who else? Linda Vincent, where are you?
I'm right
Eugene, go ahead. Hang on, Linda. Linda, hang on. Eugene, go ahead.
It's interesting, and that's one of the reasons I haven't gotten through the White Fragility book either, but this is a white woman, very interestingly pointing out to what some of the last people just said, that she is a scholar and very much laid out what has happened in history, starting from the European whites who conquered many areas of the world, making them white, in even missionaries and people like that with their power. And she's working on the idea of this white superiority thing. And it's people that is it's our normal. It's normal for me as a white male and a male, I've even have a higher standing of power. And so those things happen. Look what we did in America. We came in and, tried to wipe out the Indians and what we did to the Mexicans. And the missionaries went out and imposed our white Christianity on them. And all of those things have now become a norm. So now, and what's apparent to me, and I find myself guilty in looking over my past years in just thinking about this, how many doors opened for me because automatically I didn't even think about it because I was white and because I was male on top of that. And it sounds like that he might be getting a little bit, that's what I was trying to be interested, how he connected that from the black angle. In other words, what somebody else just said is that it's really a falsehood to say that racism is intentional, has to be intentional. With me, it's not intentional, and yet I assume all of this white superiority as I walk down the street and people open doors for me and a black person waits on me or serves me food, and I don't even think about it. So I'm not intentional about that. It's just become normal. The black situation is far different normal.
It's, and this book is interesting in that regard because he makes distinctions, Dr. Kendi makes distinctions about how racism is expressed and how it's, let's say, enculturated. So he deals with power, racism based on power, racism based on biology. So, and I mean, he talks about you know, the Black athletes and all of the opinions, perceptions we have that Black athletes, let's say, are stronger and better. Or, you know, if you're going to have a basketball team, you better get a Black person because they're made for it. So based on biology, based on ethnicity, based on culture, behavior, color, and class. On gender, sexuality, failure, success, and survival, all aspects of what he has deeply researched regarding how racism shows up in very subtle ways as well as obvious ways. So anyone else want to share on your understanding of racism? We've had some great input here. And I thank
you.
Is that my Linda Vincent?
Yeah. I remember when my daughter first started college several years ago, and she wants to be she's in sociology, and so she brought home the idea that she learned in class about white privilege, and we discussed it, and I just couldn't get my head around it. I couldn't really understand what she was trying to say to me. I guess just being in denial, you know, of not thinking that I was racist. But now that conversation comes back to me, and I realize that I have so much to learn. You know, I want to be educated about this, and I would like to change, you know, change my thoughts about racism. And so that's why I'm here, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, Linda. Anyone else on understanding racism? Hey, Kath, I'm wondering, can we turn this up any louder for folks? Okay, all right. No one else on racism, understanding it? Going, gone. Oh, I'm gonna move this down again, hang on. Okay, thanks, Mackie. So one of the things that Dr. Kendi says in the book is anti-racism is a transformative concept that reorients and re-energizes the conversation about racism and points us toward liberating new ways of thinking about ourselves, and others. So what do you think about that? It's a transformative concept that reorients and re-energizes the conversation and points us to liberating new ways of thinking about ourselves and others.
Yeah, I really like that, because for me as a little girl, when I would say something that parroted what my parents said, my grandmother, in a quiet moment when it was just her and I, she would explain it to me so I could see it from the perspective of somebody who was Black. So that was happening to me. What of somebody who could, both of my brothers, my two older brothers, were both racist through and through. So they never had that. You know, Grandma was there as a role model, but she wasn't open.
Yeah.
You know, it was too dangerous. So they went through their lives hating other cultures, you know.
Yeah.
So it's so deeply entrenched. But for myself, it was being able to say out loud or hear my own inner dialogue. I would say something to myself in reaction to something that was going on, and then another part of me would say, oops, that's a little racist, you know, and I could kind of reel it back in and look at it and then figure out what to do with it, you know, how to change that or what exactly that meant. So an example of that is was taking a woman to public aid office in Chicago, and this black woman behind the desk was just barking at everybody, sit down, shut up, quiet your kid, but, you know, that kind of thing. And I had this moment where I said to myself, you know, that angry black woman reaction, you know. So I judged her, and as soon as I heard it, I went home and spent some time with it and said to myself, wow, what I got out of my own introspection was that the burden for African Americans in most places is that they are held accountable for what every single black person has done, every negative thing that they've done. So you can have somebody who raised an upper middle class black, has never gotten in any trouble, is educated, is like, you know, you can go on and on and on. It doesn't matter. They are seen as part of the burden belongs to all of them. We don't share that as white people. People do not come to me and say that I am responsible for the behavior of all of them, you know, for everybody else's life.
Right. Good point. Good.
You know, when that got driven home by that whole experience with that woman behind that desk yelling and shouting at everybody. And then the second thing I did, which is a common part of my recovery, is to ask myself if I had ever behaved the way I saw her behaving. And yes, I did. When I had 3 jobs and an abusive husband and kids to take care of and so on, I was the same thing. I was belting out orders all day long, smacking anybody that didn't listen, you know. I've been there. I know what it feels like to have that kind of hate and bitterness and burden. Yeah, burden.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
That's my story.
Who else?
This is Eileen.
Yes.
When Eugene was talking about having white privilege, I thought about my upbringing, and I didn't feel that I was better because I was white, but I was raised Mormon, and we were taught that we were like the chosen ones, you know? So it wasn't so much that I felt better than, but I felt a part of this group that was, you know, chosen by God. And so when I think about that now, how it makes me think, boy, I didn't even think about that until right now. I was, you know, in this group, and that other friends of mine who weren't Mormon, it's not that I didn't have other friends that weren't Mormon, I did. And one of my best friends was Catholic, but it still makes me think, boy, I didn't really think about that as sort of a racist thought.
Right, right. Thank you. Thank you. Who else?
Who was that?
I'm sorry?
Who was that?
That was Eileen.
No, that was
Maria?
Hi, Maria.
Hi. I like his concept of transformational. I think it's beautiful. And when he said that, I've enjoyed everything everybody said. But when I was 10 years old, I read the newspaper every day from the time I was 7, and I came across the word apartheid. And I didn't know what it meant. So I asked my mother, and we were a large family. I'm the oldest of 8 children in 11 years. She pulled me into the bedroom, and she said, that's about the hatred of whites against blacks, but that's about Africa, but it also occurs in the United States. And I looked at her, because I was raised in a lily white little Wisconsin farm town. And I said, it happens here? And she said, yes, it does. And I ran upstairs and I threw myself on my bed and I said, someday I'm going to make a difference. This is not going to be the country I live in. And for 25 years, I worked in the Black community. And I, like somebody else said, they had a Archie Bunker father. So did I. But my mother didn't realize it when she married him. So she told him, you never tell the children. And she went to the library and read everything on Black history, every single book in the library. Wow. So she had an influence on me that was transformational.
Yes.
So that's my story. When you read his description, I do believe that transformation is the key. I love that you pointed that out, Sharon. Thank you, Rev Sharon.
You're welcome. Thank you for what you shared. Powerful, very powerful. Who else?
Well, I was going to say, I probably have a whole lot I need to learn. But I grew up in a family where my mother was from Virginia, and my dad was from Minnesota. And I never heard either one of them ever, make a comment about any other races. And I guess, I don't know if it's because we were in the Air Force and we moved around a lot and we were with a lot of other people, but I always remember my father saying that you can always learn from every single person. And he never judged. And I remember we were living in New Jersey at one time when they were doing block justice, and they wanted my father to sign a petition or whatever to keep the blacks out of the neighborhood and stuff. And I can remember my father said, "I'm not signing anything like that." He said, "As long as people keep up their yards, I don't care who lives here." So that's kind of how we grew up in our family.
Yeah.
But I will say, just like Eugene, I was brought up mostly, and I guess maybe it is a white privilege because I never had to deal with anything when I was younger, and I didn't have parents who brought any kind of the prejudice. We just didn't deal with it. I guess we didn't have to deal with it.
Didn't have to.
Yeah.
Right? Who else? You don't see me because I'm wiping up a spill. Who else? Anybody? I'll share a little bit then. My dad was a Chicago policeman. In fact, he was deputy superintendent of police in Chicago. And it wasn't fun growing up in that house because he was so strict with all of us. But the incredible thing for me as I reflected on that is that not once, not ever once, did he bring home any statement about the black population, the Puerto Ricans, not any of them. We never heard that at home. And I remember when I got to college at Michigan State, we used to have dances in the dorms. And so I was a freshman year at a dance, and a black fella asked me to dance. And of course I was excited because he's a great dancer. So I danced with him a good part of the evening, and some friends came up to me afterward and said, you really shouldn't do that. You're going to get a bad name. And I was so startled by that and taken aback, and I was upset by it because I just didn't get it because I wasn't brought up that way. And I wasn't brought up in an integrated neighborhood, but my dad certainly could have probably soured his kids, but he did not. And so I'll close with this statement. I feel like my family is so diverse culturally, and it very much excites me. My daughter, the love of her current life is a black man, and I like him a lot. In fact, I stand up for him when she has a fight with him. I say, hey, he's such a good man. You're lucky to have him. My son is married to a Hindu woman, and so we've been exposed to the Hindu faith. My nephew is, his life partner is, I think she was raised Buddhist, She's from Thailand, and so we have that culture in the family. So I say that because it is absolutely so enriching to share others' cultures, no matter what the color of their skin is. It's just so enriching. It has been for me anyway. So before I move on, any other comments about this quote? Okay then. When you think of anti-racism, what comes to mind?
That's the question. Do you have to be somebody who does something, or do you just have to change your attitude towards all people and be more aware? That's the question I have.
Who is that speaking?
Oh, sorry, it's Ann Halverson.
Hi, Ann. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Great. That was great. Who else? When you think of anti-racism, what comes to mind?
Anti means against.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think that all of, okay, I'm going to say, I feel like we all have some racism that we're dealing with in our lives.
Like what's yours?
Yes.
What's
what's mine?
Uh-huh.
I am against people who are not, yeah. I have trouble with people who are not part of solutions, that are part of the problem. And maybe that's a little bit high-handed of me, but I feel like we live in a world where we need to get along together. And I try very hard to live my life like that. Not always, you know, I'm not perfect, but I do try to live by a life where I accept all people. I don't always have to like what they're doing, but I accept all people for the child of God that they are. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Who else?
This is Georgia. I would find it interesting that if you could be an anti-racist without doing anything. To me, that feels more like race neutral, given the situation that we're in today. And being neutral is equivalent in many people's mind to being racist. So I think you have to do something, whether it's being supportive of others, whether it's gently and respectfully pointing out when someone is expressing a racist idea, or whether it's participating in civil discourse about a particular policy or idea or politics or any of those things. And those can get heated. But if you can maintain the civil discourse, I think we all learn from it. So
have you had an experience with that?
Yes.
Did you share it?
I was talking with a couple of friends good friends, about the concept of white privilege. And one of them expressed her idea that there's no such thing as white privilege because we get where we get through hard work. And it doesn't matter what color your skin is. If you work hard, you're going to be successful. And we had a conversation that stretched over a 2-day time frame, where I pointed out to her that when you've got so many barriers in front of you, hard work doesn't make a difference.
And you were speaking of barriers in front of who?
In front of Black people, over the years, in front of the LGBT. I mean, my goodness, the Supreme Court just now said they can't be fired. Women. I mean, it goes across all striations of the human race at different levels. And she said, well, her dad was poor, and another friend said, well, my folks came from the Appalachians. Well, yes, but if that's the only barrier that they faced, they could pull themselves out of whatever situation they were in more easily than others.
Thank you.
And one example of that is that I've read is look at a bird cage. The bird is inside the cage. And if you only look at one wire, that bird should be able to get out. But if you're looking at all of the wires that are connected and create the cage around the bird, you recognize that the systemic racial policies that we have become that bird cage because there's hundreds of them.
What a wonderful example. What a wonderful metaphor for what it's like to be trapped in racism.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was just beautiful.
Thanks.
I mean, painful, but I don't know if painful is the right word, but thanks.
Who else? Is that you, Sig? Unmute.
Good to see it.
There you go.
Okay. I think years ago, I called myself becoming part of the solution. I married a Black man. I have Black in-laws. I have Black children. I was raised in a predominantly prejudiced household. My father, when he'd have to drive through certain parts of town, would always say, roll up the windows and lock the doors. And so when my mother and father had split when I had decided to marry a Black man. And my mother said, oh, it's all right to go with him, don't marry him. Okay, so then I married him, and he said, it's all right to marry him, but don't have any children by him. Well, then I had children by him. So what does that tell you? And over the years, I found out the white privilege came in handy. It allowed us to live in predominantly white neighborhoods, where if I were Black and he were Black, it might not have happened. Yeah. And it got us many privileges because I was white and he wasn't. So, so that is my contribution. And I noticed that even he was prejudiced. He was prejudiced against a lot of Blacks. He was prejudiced against Mexicans. And I thought later on, after I divorced him and he passed away, I noticed that when I moved here, I had said something about, I was repeating something somebody else said without thinking about it. about Mexicans taking over jobs and such. And my my number 2 daughter, who's black, she says, "Mom, don't you see that's prejudice statement?" And I says, "You know, I never thought about it." "Yes, it is. Thank you for correcting me." So
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Very powerful. Anybody else on this point?
Yes, I have something.
Who's that?
I'm Linda Rodenberg.
Hi, Linda.
I'm a friend of Billy's, and I'm also in the process of reading the book, White Fragility. I was raised in Brooklyn, New York, and in the 1960s, I lived in the neighborhood Bedford-Stuyvesant, where there were riots in the middle of the street where I lived. So I grew up in the middle of all that 1960s. My parents were not racist in any way. We lived and had friends and black, and as a child, I did not know what other than white meant. They were all my friends. So that's what I grew up with. And well, where am I going to go with this? So I did not understand when I was younger what prejudice meant until I married my first husband, and he was horrible. That's all I'm going to say. So then later in my years, I went back to school and I became a social worker. I have a degree in social work. So I learned a lot about what this subject matter is in my studies. And at the same time, I was going through a lot of transformation in my life, and I was learning about social construct and community and all that, and also challenging my beliefs on what others were thinking about and all along those lines. Anyway, my comment about what I think about anti-racism is that in order to reach some kind of peace in this world, it begins with each and every one of us. And we have to be willing to make that change within ourselves initially, to change our deep-seated cultural beliefs. We need to examine them. And then also to examine what it means to be non-white. And this book, White Fragility, I'm not really promoting it. It's just something that I'm very interested in and I'm curious about. So that's where I'm at.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Appreciate you sharing. I'm going to share with you something that Dr. Kendi says here, making a distinction. He calls it dueling consciousness, and a distinction between assimilationist, segregationist, and anti-racist. So assimilationist, one who is expressing the racist idea that a racist group is culturally or behaviorally inferior and is supporting cultural or behavioral enrichment programs to develop that racial group. Segregationist, one who is expressing the racist idea that a permanently inferior racial group can never be developed and is supporting policy that segregates away that racial group. Anti-racist, one who is expressing the idea that racial groups are equals and none needs developing and is supporting policy that reduces racial inequity. That's interesting, isn't it? One who is expressing the idea that racial groups are equals and none needs developing and is supporting policy that reduces racial inequity.
So that does require action on our part, right?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And he makes a case for that in the book, that part of being an anti-racist, and some of you have spoken that here, part of being an anti-racist is to take some action. And so just us gathering like this to explore the idea and how it works or doesn't work is taking some action. Someone spoke about having the courage to confront, so to speak, racist comments. So, anyone else on this one? When you think of anti-racist, what comes to mind? Okay. So pause for a moment and consider what questions you have about racism or anti-racism. I'll tell you something that comes up for me periodically. And it just came up, who was I watching? I was watching Stephen Colbert, and he had a former black football player on the show. And this football player now has a program, I think online program, about, what do you call it, courageous conversations with a black man. And this gentleman brought up the kneeling during the national anthem, and Colin Kaepernick, who was the first to do that, and the racist comments that brought out, and I have had to check myself on that, because the second or third time that's come up in my experience recently. But I remember when it happened, I was outraged at Kaepernick because, and this I'm sure Dr. Kendi would say, this is a racist attitude, because Colin Kaepernick is probably, this is what I was telling myself, the thoughts in my mind. Colin Kaepernick has received an incredible career and lifestyle as a result of this country's as a result of this country, the opportunities in this country, and how can he take a stand against what this country has done for him? And I'm sure that's an anti-racist attitude so I've been rethinking that. Is kneeling, like many football players did subsequently to Kaepernick, is kneeling during the national anthem a solution, a step toward a solution to the problem of racism, excuse me. And so I'm still contemplating that. Pretty silent here. What are you all thinking?
Maria here. Maria.
Maria.
Yes. So I want to hear from you and others if we could just, besides confrontation, which I did last week in a situation where a hostess was seating people without masks differently when they were white versus black, and I did report it and I did write it up at Chili's. What, besides direct things that we confront, what are the other policy supporters, things that we can do? You know, Billy brought it up, you brought it up, the last woman brought it up too. What can we do proactively to create more of a non-racist or an anti-racist world? And I'm willing to do things. So what kind of things are there suggestions that we could do? Besides this group?
Okay, so I've always been out there, you know, I've been the one getting in somebody's face and defending other people. But as I've had health issues and I have been limited in what I could do, I asked myself that same question. Now what can I do? One of the, I ended up with this huge list of things. It started with every time there's something I see on the news or something I hear about, I can pick up the phone and call my legislator. And you can do that without leaving your name, you know, of course, you know, they have ways of finding out, but, you know, and just say, I object. When I hear that a bill came out, that is, you know, that is an anti-racist activity of some sort, is to make a phone call or send an email or send a letter and let it be known.
Good idea.
So there's a lot of things like that where I don't have to be out there in somebody's face, where I don't have to, you know, be stirring up trouble. There's a lot of things like that that I can do, especially for people who are housebound or, you know, or just fragile. And not everybody, you know, likes confrontation. I'm Irish, I love it, you know, but not everybody likes it. But still, there's a lot of things that we can do to make it different. So let me just tell you two more things. I managed a project in Illinois that was called Project Safe. And it was to get families out of the child welfare system. And all of those families suffered from racism. You know, it didn't matter what neighborhood it was. There was racism of some sort. There was poverty. There was malnutrition. This is a consistent thing with all of these families. And so when we got Project Safe going, the outcomes were so phenomenal that it spread across the nation. So I was getting calls from other states to come and train their staff to understand how to do it. But we did the most simple, basic things was to just, our outreach, training the outreach workers, I'd say, when you go into a home and you're dealing with somebody who's another culture, ask them if they would be more comfortable with an outreach worker with the same culture. You know, just, and listen to what they have to say. They may be very comfortable with who you are, but they might not. And one black girl said to me when I went into the house, she had a couple of kids, and we went in, there was a team that went in, and she said to me, she pointed at me like this, she went like that, and she said, when white women come dressed the way you are, they're coming to take something away. They're going to take my kids, they're going to take my benefits, they're going to blah, 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 blah. And I thought, that's some simple thing when I was going into their homes to make sure that I dressed down, which is very hard for me to do program. So they're just, anyway, I'm going to leave it at that, but my mind is just generating 1,000 simple 1-minute things.
Thank you, thank you. Who else to respond to Maria's question about what are some ideas of actions to take?
Be a good voter.
Be a good voter. Yay.
Check your candidates, check their what they stand for, and see if we can get some of those that are bigots and racists out of office and put in what what will help heal the country.
Thank you. Great, great idea. Who
This-
else?
This is Georgia. One of the things, we moved to our new house in January, and we had, 6 weeks to get to know the neighborhood before everything shut down. But I don't know many Black people in Sun City. I just don't. But there is a family on my street. And most of the people on my street are Republican with some closeted Democrats. And one of the things that I can do subtly or not, it depends on your definition of subtle, is I put a Black Lives Matter sign out in my front yard, so that the one Black family I know, that when they go to the grocery store and they drive past my house, they know there's one family on their block that supports them.
Great, great. Simple acts. Anybody else want to respond to Maria's question? Was that helpful, Maria?
Yes, that was. And I like what Georgia just said. I have several Black families in my little apartment complex right here. And yesterday I had extra food from Chili's and from Streets of New York, and I took the food over to a Black neighbor, and they were so thrilled with the food. And I realized it would be a good idea to go knock on the door with a mask on and have a conversation, more conversations, because we really all like each other.
Oh,
So thank you, Georgia, for inspiring me. And I might put a Black Lives Matter, although I think I can't do it on my front door. So I got to get creative. Because I'm in a complex. I think it would be forbidden, but I got to figure it out.
Thanks, Maria. Anybody else on ideas for being part of the solution? Okay.
Well, this is Billy. This is Billy. I heard yesterday an appeal to buy from Black businesses and products that were made by, Black companies and stuff. And so I didn't even know there were so many. I mean, they had this big list. And so, that's something that we could do.
Right. Thank you. Okay, well, I said we were going to be together for an hour, and it's now an hour and 15. Are there any closing comments? Well, how about this? I'm making myself a note. What's your takeaway for today?
This is
Eileen.
Eileen. My takeaway is from all of these people who have made the suggestions about taking action, because I tend to kind of shy away from confrontation too, though I don't when I'm hearing people say negative statements. So I have to do the same thing with my thoughts about other groups, that I can do something positive to help them be more inclusive.
Great, great. And maybe when we reconvene on the 22nd, you'll come back with ideas, Eileen. Anybody else? Takeaway, please.
Maria here.
Maria.
Thank you so much to everybody for not only their stories, but also to the suggestions. And I want to know where I can get a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. Because I can wear it, I can flaunt it on my skin, but I can't put a sign on my door. So if anybody has that, but I appreciate the ideas.
Maria,
Mm-hmm.
check Amazon.
I don't buy anything on Amazon.
No.
Just Google it. Just Google it online then.
Right.
Okay. Okay,
Right.
I will. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
just a suggestion, since we're all wearing masks when we go outside, I hope, you can also get a mask with that stenciled on it.
Good idea, Georgia.
Great, great input. I want to close with this statement from Dr. Kendi's book. To be an anti-racist is to view national and transnational ethnic groups as equal in all their differences. To be anti-racist is to challenge the racist policies that plague racialized ethnic groups across the world. To be anti-racist is to view the inequities between all racialized ethnic groups as a problem of policy. So, I'm going to close with a prayer unless someone would like to make a final comment. Okay.
I just want to share one more thing that weighs heavy on me. Is that all of us who are moms know what it feels like to send your kids off to school and be worried, to have some concern. But for a Black mother, the burden is a million times more than just our concern, because children at their age, the dirty little rats at their age, what happens if that child is Black and they at their age are severe consequences. We have kids 9, 10, 11 years old who are sitting in juvenile detention centers who are doing nothing more than just acting their age. A little shoving, whatever, the kinds of things. And so I guess I just kind of want a prayer to go out to all of the Black mothers all over that deal with that every single day. Will my kid end up in detention?
Or will they get home? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, here's the prayer. God, we give thanks for this time together and all of the courageous sharing. We give thanks that your presence in each of us enlightens our minds and hearts as we go forward with clear divine ideas about being the solution or part of the solution to equality, one nation under God, with liberty for all. And so we thank you for this time, for the ideas that are generated, for the creative ideas that come forward when we meet again. Amen? Amen. Can I hear an amen?
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.